about 11:35, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I am Jon Stratis. I've been a lead robot inspector since 2012. Joining us today, we have Al Skirkowitz, the chief robot inspector since before I can remember for FRC. So he's probably going to chime in as we go through here, share some of his own stories if we have some time. This session is taking the place of my normal robot inspector session, where we talk about some of the most common ways teams fail inspection and what they can do during the build season to fix them, because things are just so different this year. We don't know if we'll have inspections yet. I haven't heard anything. And so my assumption at this point is that there will not be any form of robot inspection. If there is, I'm guessing it will be virtual, something done over Zoom like this, or something along those lines, just because of the COVID situation and the additional risk involved with going to different teams and visiting their shops or gathering people together. So first thing I want to bring up is that rules do change from one year to the next, and it's important to read the full rule book. This was never more apparent than my my second year as an LRI, 2013. In 2012 and earlier, you could see here we had this sizing box where you put your robot on this platform, and then that platform slid into the box. And then we had a bar that slid down the front face. If your robot fit in the box, then you met the size requirements. If it didn't fit in the box, then you had to go do some work to make it fit. So that was a very, very strict requirement, in that something as small as a single bolt head sticking outside of that size would cause you to fail. In 2013, first changed the rules, and they went to a total frame perimeter measurement of 112 inches, where we ignored small things like bolt heads. So very different, but if you look at the difference in the sizes there, 28 by 38 to 112 inches, that means it's a total of 20 inches smaller on your overall frame perimeter measurements, which did end up causing a problem. Particularly, I remember Lake Superior Regional that year. We walked in, teams started loading in, and we're looking at the robots, and you could immediately tell that two of those robots were too big. They had taken their previous year's robot, tore everything off, and just built that year's robot on the same frame they used the previous year. So they built to that 28 by 38 without realizing that the rules had changed. And getting them updated and getting them fixed was a huge, huge undertaking. We were fortunate enough that we could discover it during load-in Wednesday night and have an inspector standing in their pit Thursday morning saying, all right, I'm here to get you guys legal, and we're going to work with you pretty much all day in getting your size down so that then we can get the rest of it legal. So trying to resolve that problem was hugely difficult for some of these teams because their mechanisms were designed around the size of their robot. And so as soon as you shrink down the frame, now you can't get the mechanisms inside your frame. And so, I had the inspectors working with them for the entire day Thursday, and by the end of Thursday, everyone got their frames down to the correct size. They got the robots rebuilt and more or less functional, but there was still some parts of the robot that maybe were sticking out past the frame perimeter, which isn't legal. We worked with the teams to compromise, and we said, we're going to let you go out in the field, but the mechanisms that these parts work with, your shooter or whatever it is, we're going to pull the breakers, and that mechanism is not going to be functional for you until we can get it inside your frame perimeter. That way we could let them play. We could let them go out there, play defense, do whatever they could do while they continue to work on getting themselves completely legal. It's a situation we don't want to run into. In my experience, it's really was unique to that year because of the scope of the difficulty with that rule change and the impact it had on teams that missed the fact that rule changed. The other really frustrating problem I come across at events are frame shorts. They can be caused by all sorts of things. Pretty much any wire on the robot can short to frame, and trying to find it can be incredibly frustrating for teams. Perhaps my favorite story behind this, and I wish Chris was here. He's one of our CSAs, and he was looking at a team at Northern Lights 3100 a year or two ago. And he sat with them trying to find this frame short for half an hour or so. And finally they called me over to get another set of eyes on it. And they're explaining the problem to me and how, you know, the frame short seems to go away and then it will come back, and it goes away and it comes back. As they're describing this problem, I realized that every time it goes away, you know, that it's when they're moving the robot, tipping it up on its side, or they are pushing down on their electrical board, or otherwise changing something to do with the robot. And so, you know, I go in, I say, okay, the first thing we have to do is figure out, you know, try and split the electrical system in half. We're going to see if it's part of the sensors or part of your power area. So unplug the RoboRio from your PDP. If the problem goes away, then you know it's something connected to the RoboRio, which is typically a sensor or a USB camera, something of that nature. If it doesn't go away, then you know it's probably one of those main power leads that's ultimately causing the problem. In this case, we unplugged it and the problem went away right away. So we plugged it back in, the problem came back. And we start then individually unplugging their PWM connections until we got to one where we unplugged it and the problem went away and stayed away. Plugged everything else in, and we could actually show just by moving that one in and out that that was where the frame short was going. And it was a sensor on the very bottom of the robot. And, you know, it actually frustrated Chris because he had checked that sensor. They'd flipped the robot up on end and he checked it and everything was fine. Well, it actually wasn't the sensor itself that was shorting out. It was the wire, the PWM wire, was caught between their polycarbonate electrical board and their metal frame. And so it actually frayed and was shorting to the frame right at that point. When they flipped the robot up, it took the pressure off the wire and it stopped contacting the frame. And likewise, whenever they would push down real hard on the electrical board, it would take the pressure off and stop contacting the frame. So we were able to identify it that way. Similar, but sort of going in the other direction, last year at GNR, 5172 had a short to frame that I was helping them look at. And this one, we determined it was coming through their power connections. When we unplugged the RoboRio, the short remained. So we had to go through and start unplugging each and every power connection until the short went away. We ended up finding out that this was actually a short in their Falcon motor on their shooter. Just the one and only time I've seen a Falcon motor have a short, but we have seen motors in the past have shorts. The biggest one, which I'm sure Al remembers, is the 775 from BaneBots. When that first came out, it was a horrible condition, as almost all of them had shorts in them to the frame. And it caused a lot of issues that year, something that has since been corrected. A couple of other common issues I've seen, the CTRE mag encoder. Typically you use this you know, in a gearbox and it mounts into a plastic component, so it's not a problem. But I have seen some teams that actually mount this into a aluminum frame member, and they embed a magnet in the end of whatever they're trying to sense. And the bolts that they use to mount it onto that aluminum frame member can actually cause it to short to the frame. So that's something to be careful about. And I've seen other frayed wires, a USB camera going to a USB cable going to a camera had a short on a sharp edge, which is one of the reasons why we're always harping on teams to check for sharp edges and remove sharp edges from the robot, because they can cause frame shorts. And then of course there's sort of the classic one where you have someone drilling through their robot to mount something and they hit a wire. when they drill through. It's something we see quite often. If you see someone from 1816, you can ask about the time they accidentally drilled through their robo-reel, which is a little worse than this. But drills can cause a lot of electrical problems because drills and wires typically don't mix very well. Bumpers can be a surprising issue for teams. You know, the rules are very prescriptive. They tell you exactly what you should be doing, but we see all sorts of problems. A couple of years ago, up at GNR, there was a blizzard during the event. All right, so it happened pretty much actually during load-in, and they shut down the highway, but we managed to get most of the teams in. But once you were in the building Thursday morning, you were staying there. You weren't going anywhere. But we found a couple of really interesting problems. One team correctly assembled their bumpers. They did everything right. And then they had their numbers that they wanted to iron on. So they took the numbers, put them on the bumper, and they ironed it on and proceeded to melt their pool noodles. So the pool noodles were only about half as thick as they were supposed to be. Another team, I think this was a team from Canada, could only find 3.5-inch pool noodles. They couldn't find the 2.5-inch pool noodles that were needed. So they took those 3.5-inch pool noodles and they ran them through their bandsaw to cut them down to 2.5-inch square pool noodles. Very, very nice looking bumpers, but something that isn't legal. In both these cases though, you know, we're in the middle of a blizzard. You can't get out to any place in February in Grand Forks to actually try and find pool noodles, and we didn't have enough to go around. So we had to make some compromises in order to get the teams on the field in you know, the condition that was as legal as possible for them that year. In another year, and I think Dean, who's one of our inspectors, will remember this, he was working with the team that year quite intensively on getting all of their stuff legal. And they had a lot of work that they had to go through to get things legal and functional. And he did a great job doing that. And then we're getting down near the end of the evening. They get the bumpers on the robot. He's looking at them, and he realized that they had a major problem with their bumpers. Instead of using the 3/4-inch plywood, 5 inches tall, they had a 4x1-inch board that they used for their bumper backing material. And so we had to find them new plywood. They only had a single mentor there who was a little overwhelmed with everything. So I actually went over, I tossed my keys to the head ref for the event, who he was done for the day, fortunately, said, go to Home Depot and get me some plywood. So he went to Home Depot, we got the plywood cut for the team. We got all working so that they could actually show up the next morning with legal bumpers. And since the team needed so much help, and the one mentor they had was so overwhelmed, she was thrown into it at the last minute to actually bring the team to the event because their other mentor had backed out, and you know, she wasn't really technical. So I said, okay, Dean, you're a mentor for that team now for the rest of the event. And he stuck with them, and I know the team was very appreciative of the effort just to get them legal. We've also seen, you know, a lot of teams moving to reversible bumpers. They can look really nice, but they can also have some problems. Really, the first year I think that teams started using reversible bumpers, they had problems with corners. They had problems with gaps in their bumpers, where you would have the wrong color showing, or you would know that you aren't supposed to have the wrong color showing there, so you would cover it with black so it's not the wrong color, and none of that's legal. So you really have to put a lot of effort into making your reversible bumpers functional and look nice, and make sure that everything stays in place during the match. Because if that flap comes loose, then suddenly half your bumper is the wrong color, and that's not good for the refs, and they will disable you if that happens. So you want your Velcro, if you're using Velcro to attach it, to be good Velcro so it has a good firm attachment. But with the bumper rules often going all the way down to the floor, the past few years, you want to make sure that you aren't accidentally going to Velcro yourself to the floor either. So be careful with how you might take care of that. Make sure you don't cause yourselves more issues than you solve by moving to reversible bumpers. Now, Rodney is joining us here. This was, a few years ago. Bags were a thing. They weren't this past year, so some of you may not be aware of it, but at the end of the build, you had to actually put your robot in a bag, everyone on the same day, and then it stayed in that bag until you got to competition. Well, Rodney read the rules, and he noticed a section in the rules that said, teams attending 2-day events were allowed to take their robot out of the bag for up to 6 hours to do some work on it. And he said, "Oh, okay, we can do that," and proceeded to lead his team into taking the robot out of the bag and doing some work before the event. So they show up at the event, they documented everything beautifully, 100% honest about it. I'm reading their lockup form. I say, what? What did they do here? So we get to Thursday morning, I approach the team, we talk about it, I show them the rule, read through it with Rodney, and I say, okay, so how many days is our event? It's like, well, today's Thursday and Friday and Saturday. That's three days. Oops. So we worked with the team. We said, you guys spent X number of hours. It wasn't the full 6, which basically means you got that time additional that every other team here didn't get. So we're just going to leave your robot in the bag until lunch, right? It was about lunchtime. That would be just about make up the time. Team was cool with it. They totally understood. They really worked with us well to do it. And when the proper time came, we went, unlocked the bag, and off they went. And for a successful event. And obviously it taught the team a valuable lesson in reading the rules carefully. It really taught Rodney a lesson that he should be volunteering as one of our field supervisors instead of reading the rules. So he's been one of our valued volunteers ever since. This was kind of an interesting one in 2017. I was sitting at work one day, and one of our other lead robot inspectors, Matt Mittag, gave me a call. And he worked with a guy from another team who came by his office to ask this question. Can he use a relay in a custom circuit? And so I said, well, yeah, why couldn't you? Matt says, that's the exact same thing I said, but let me have this guy, explain it to you. So he put me on speakerphone, and the guy started going through these different rules that I have up here. And I actually copied these rules from the 2017 rule book. So don't rely on these. They've probably changed since then. But we're reading through this, and the way he's reading it and the way we're reading it, it sort of links everything together to say that, hey, relays are supposed to be used to control motors, which means they cannot be part of custom circuits. And he sort of changed my mind on it, saying, the way the rules are written, it sure sounds like you shouldn't be able to use a spike relay as part of a custom circuit, but I think you should be able to. So we got together, we crafted a question for the Q&A, which was kind of difficult because this is a very in-depth question, and the Q&A limits you in your character count. So we had to get that question out there on the Q&A so that the GDC would sort of see the complexity behind us and how the rules would seem to say that you can't do it. And then they ended up making a couple of changes by referencing a couple of different rules within these questions so that it would indicate that only relays that are being used as speed controllers are applicable to these particular rules. If you're using it in a custom circuit, then you should be just fine. This is something that I've actually heard at competition a few times, where our season's over, we're done, it's all done, and it's so incredibly frustrating when you hear this, because it means that things didn't go well for the team, and the team's not happy, and they just want to get out of the building. And it's especially disheartening to hear it before alliance selection. And in this case, I have two stories that I'm going to talk about where teams were giving up before alliance selection Saturday morning. In one case, we're doing reways for teams, and so I'm at the scale helping teams reweigh, get their final inspection check. And I have one of my inspectors come over and he said, you need to come talk to this team. They're asking to open up the garage door so they can unload. I'm like, what? Alliance selection hasn't even happened yet. So I get someone to step in and manage the scale for me. I go up to the garage door to talk to this team, and I'm like, guys, alliance selection is going to be in 10 minutes here. Why are you trying to leave now? You might get picked. You might be on an alliance, you might be playing this afternoon. They're like, well, we have a long drive back. We know, our robot's not that great. No one's going to pick us. So, we just want to get on the road. And it's like, well, how do you argue against that? But at the same time, we want them to stick around because you never know what's going to happen. And I eventually said, okay, well, what rank are you guys? Thinking, well, maybe if they're ranked 60, then, you kind of understand where they're coming from. And they're like, yeah, we're ranked 10th. And I'm like, 10th? No, you guys are not allowed to leave because you might be an alliance captain. If number 1 picks number 2, then you move up to 9th. And then if number 2 picks number 3, you move up to 8th and you'll be an alliance captain. So you guys are getting back to your pick. You're staying out there. And the way it worked out, they ended up being the captain for the 7th seed alliance that year. So it's incredible what can happen during alliance selection. You have something to add, Al?
Yeah, that same thing happened at the Midwest Regional one year. Rookie team was the second alternate. Team broke during the finals. We had to bring in the alternate. The first alternate refused to play. The second alternate came in not knowing what to do, did their job. The Alliance won the Midwest Regional and they went to championship.
Right. So you really never know what happens until after it happens. So you really don't want to leave. The other case happened here in 2019. I'm saying back there doing finals reinspection, and this time instead of being an inspector, it was our admin lead walked all the way back to me at North Star and said, I need you to talk to a team. They just came up to me and said that they want to, remove themselves from alliance selection, and they're ranked 6th. I'm like, okay, why the heck would anyone do that, right? Their robot must be in pieces, right? Destroyed. So I go back there to talk to them and say, okay, what's going on, guys? I want to make sure that we can get you playing so you guys can be an alliance captain. And he said, well, our drivetrain gearbox is broke here, and we aren't going to be able to drive. The robot's not going to be able to move. They're trying to do the gracious thing by pulling out so they aren't weighing down an alliance and picking people who could be on a winning alliance. Understand it. I took a quick look at what was going on. I said, okay, guys, I have rebuilt drivetrains before over lunch, before alliance selection. We can do this. We can get your robot functional. Go out there, do alliance selection, make an alliance, and we'll get this working. And so sat down, we pulled apart their gearboxes, put them back together, got everything working there. We said, okay, your robot's driving now. Is there anything else I can help you guys with? And they're like, well, yeah, our elevator here broke too. And they didn't have the chain, they didn't have the sprocket. And I said, okay, it broke on the field, so they didn't have any of that stuff. I said, go up and ask the field, they have it. They found the stuff in the spare parts box at the field where, broken parts go to languish until teams decide to come up and ask for them. And we figure out that, yeah, it was a simple problem where it was actually the same problem they had on the drivetrain, where they were using a shaft collar to restrain stuff where they should have used a more secure method like a nut and a bolt. And so we get things put together, we put some spacers in, we get it locked in place with a nut and a bolt. and they could go out there then during the eliminations and actually use the robot to its full functioning ability. And I still had time to go up and get lunch before playoffs started. So, you know, even with the broken robot, if you can find someone to ask for help, you can get things fixed and get back out there and running again without having to just give up. And so I think, you know, the story of this slide really is persistence, right? Stick around and see what happens. 2014 Lake Superior Regional. Al will remember this regional quite well. Without a doubt, this was the most dangerous FRC event we have had in Minnesota. So first I'm going to talk about match 33, which is sort of highlighted with this picture right here. Billowing smoke coming out of a robot. And it was one of those things where, unfortunately, I was in the pits at the time, so I couldn't actually see it happen on the field. But if you search, there is a video for this. It's linked on Chief Delphi. It's on YouTube. Match 33, 2014 Lake Superior Regional, where you can actually see the smoke coming out of the robot, and you can see the human player on the side of the field with one of those big trackballs. He was going to throw it into the robot. As the smoke starts coming out, he pauses, and then he just sort of says, well, I'm supposed to throw it into the robot, so I'm going to throw it into the robot. And continue and proceeds to throw it into this, you know, this billowing smoke. They stop the match. Robot come back. We find out what happens. You can sort of see in this right picture, they had this scissors mechanism, and so they had electrical components on the bottom here of the robot, and they had electrical components up here on the bottom of this top panel. And what happened is a spike relay came loose on that top panel. And so when they put the scissors mechanism down, that relay got crushed into one of their drivetrain motors, one of their sim motors, and it shorted out the electrical system. Fortunately, there was no fire. It was just a lot of smoke. But it meant that they had to essentially redo their entire electrical system on their robot. They ended up missing one match, and then they were back out on the field running like normal and didn't have any additional problems the rest of that event. We also had a problem with these white clippered tanks. So you can see here, inspectors looking at it here, where one actually exploded on the field. So it exploded on the field. It actually sent pieces up into the stands, which if you've been to Duluth, you know that those stands are raised up a good 10 feet above the playing field and go back quite a ways. There's a lot of room there. So when one of these explodes, it releases a lot of energy. And I managed to find a picture of the robot in question here. And so you can see that they had these tanks out on the end of these two arms that would flop down in order to pick up the ball from either side of the robot. And this team was having some issues where in one particular match, one of these arms flopped all the way down and was laying on the floor, and another robot drove over it by accident. That combined with a manufacturing defect in these tanks is actually what ended up causing it to explode. So this ended up being actually sort of a season-long investigation. There were some exploding tanks at other events as well, until first eventually outlawed these white clipper tanks with the green lettering that you can sort of see here. And Clipper stopped selling those due to the manufacturing defect. They now sell black tanks that are perfectly legal and safe. You have something to add, Al?
Yeah, if you look at that picture, you'll notice silver bands around the tanks. What this team had chosen to do was use hose clamps to secure the tanks to their robot. And in tightening those to make sure that the tanks didn't move, they had deformed the tank so badly that it had put marks in the tank and changed the shape of the tank to oval. And that, I think, led to the stress fracture. Besides the fact that the tanks did have a manufacturing defect, in this particular case, those hose clamps really caused the problem. my recommendation is that you don't use hose clamps, that you use wire ties or something else. They do manufacture PVC tank clamps. I would recommend you use those.
Mhm. Yeah, so Al was actually up there at the event, and what you can't see in this picture on the left here is Al sitting right about here filling out the incident report form for first, as the rest of us are looking at these tanks and saying, what the heck happened? So I want to bring up why we do this, and it really comes down to the success stories. You know, Big Al is sort of famous for his quote here: "We want teams to compete, to do so safely, and within the rules in that order." You know, our goal really is to make sure that every team can get out there and compete. We want to make sure that we do it safely so that things don't explode on the field or catch on fire, and no one gets hurt. And we want to make sure that everyone is playing to the same set of rules, so that we're on a fair playing surface here. So I talked about the GNR issue with the team that Dean worked with. That really was a great success story for us, because we got a team that really needed a lot of help, the help they needed, so that they could get out there and have a good event. And I actually went and looked them up, and that team still exists. If we didn't get them out there, if we didn't get them the help they needed, with the condition they were in, with their mentor pulling out at the last minute and bringing someone else in to just get them to the event, it was possible that the team would fold that year. So we want to make sure that we see teams come back the following year by having a good time and getting out there and seeing their robot work to the best of its ability. And another story that just sort of didn't fit in anywhere else, 2015 at the North Star Regional, we had a bunch of teams from China come over, 3 teams from China come over. And they were all rookie teams, and they were, there were only a handful of teams in China at the time, pretty much all rookies. And so that year I said, one of my veteran robot inspectors, John Peterson, I said, you have experience, working with people in China. Part of his job is interfacing with suppliers in China. So, he knows the culture and all that. So I said, you work with these teams. So he was, the LRI, the inspector working with those 3 teams, while all of the other inspectors worried about the other 57 teams at the event. And 2 of the teams came over and were in great shape, but one of them had this articulating drivetrain that was comprised with drawer slides, so that the robot could expand horizontally during the match using some pneumatic pistons. And I think we all know from seeing this that such a system would not hold up during play. And so he ended up sitting there working with them for most of the event on their robot, first getting their drivetrain solidified so that it would hold up throughout the event, and then working through additional issues. And so I think what you'll often see, like with Dean or with John, is that some of these teams that need help and really are struggling will get adopted by an inspector for the event, and that inspector will spend most of that event working with the team, helping them out. And then when we get to Saturday, if that team makes it to the playoffs or gets an award, the inspector ends up celebrating with the team. And part of that, the reason for that is because we feel that we are a part of every team at the event, and we want to see every team succeed. And so when you form this bond with the team that you're working closely with, even if it's just for a couple of days, it really feels great to see them be successful. So this is sort of the last of my planned slides. How do you join in the fun? If we have some students here, once you graduate, come back and volunteer as a robot inspector. Mentors, please volunteer as a robot inspector. You can contact me. You can contact Lori Shimizu. She's our Chief Volunteer Coordinator and a senior mentor. So her contact information is on the first website. So you can contact us, let us know that you're interested, and we'll work with you on that. Typically, we use our off-season events, particularly the MRI event in Roseville, as a training for new inspectors. So we'll have you there. We'll walk through some stuff. We'll have you inspect some robots. So we'll go through the whole process there, because it really is a low pressure situation where, you know, we aren't doing formal inspection, so it's really no big deal. But you actually don't have to go to one of those off-season events to inspect with us. We've had, you know, people who can't make it to those, who sign up to inspect, and they turn out to be great. You need that, you know, some of that technical knowledge so that you can work your way through the rules, and you can walk your way through an electrical system, a pneumatic system, and understand how a robot is built. So pretty much anyone who's been on a team and helped build a robot is going to do just fine as a robot inspector. But you also really need that that personal interaction ability, you know, the ability to work with the team, to understand where they're coming from, and to get them on board with any fixes that need to happen. Because sometimes you run into a mentor, a rookie mentor, who wants nothing to do with you. Right, Alex?
Yeah, it wasn't. If we could, and I don't know if you've seen the podcast, but I wish my co-coach was with us. If we could have if we would have been able to record part of that, like what happened. I mean, I obviously now am, not that I'm embarrassed of what all transpired, but yeah, we were inducted into first FRC with Flames, and it was. Yeah, again, they talk about gracious professionalism. Mentors, you definitely need to hold on to that as you're working through this, and realizing, as I didn't back then in 2013, the inspectors aren't gatekeepers. The inspectors are really there to help. But if I could go back and tell my rookie mentor self what Jon's role was, what both Stratis and Peterson's roles were at that time, it'd do me a great bit of service. So. Yeah, I think this is something that I'd like all rookie teams to see, is just what the expectations of the mentors and the expectations of the inspectors are. So, and Jon, you always do such a great job working with the new rookie teams and the struggling teams. I've watched a lot of those interactions between our LRIs here in Minnesota and the robot inspectors in Minnesota and teams that are struggling. And you guys do it with such great compassion. It's awesome to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, one of the things I tell my inspectors before we get started at every event is that, you know, if there's a serious problem, I want to know about it. And if a team is pushing back on anything, right, you tell them that something needs to change and they don't want to do it, to come get me. I want to be the bad guy in that situation so that my inspectors can be the good guys. Because when it comes right down to it, my inspectors are the ones who have the time to sit and work with a team for an hour or 2 hours to get something functional and legal. I have to be more available to go around and work with a lot of different teams. So if, you know, the teams want to think of me as the bad guy, that's just fine, so long as I can get my inspector in there and have them helping the team and getting the team going and being successful for the event. So at this point, you know, we've got 10 minutes or so left. I want to open this up to a Q&A for anyone here. Sort of an inspection, ask me anything, if you will. You've got, you know, myself, you've got Al here, Dean's one of our long-term inspectors as well. Any of us can answer any questions any of you might have.
Do you mind if I lead off with that? Throw some
Yes.
fire here. We're a couple years now into the no bag culture, right? We're no longer bagging a robot. Has that increased the problems that you guys have seen, or has that helped to decrease some of the inspection problems that you've seen?
You know, it's kind of interesting because 2020 was our first year with no bag, and it got cut short. I know it seems like it's so long ago at this point.
It seems, yeah, it seems like I thought it was 2018 or 2019. Wow, it's only 2020. Okay.
First time. And so, you know, here in Minnesota, we were fortunate. We ran 3 of our 5 events before the season got cut off. So we could see it at Great Northern and up in Duluth. And in my experience, the problems are pretty much all the same. You end up having a set of teams that come up early.
It's the Come song.
Yeah, you have teams who come up early who
It's
are
the Come
ready,
song.
and
It's the Come song. Hey Adam, do you want the baby?
so you have teams who come up here and are ready to go right, you know, when pits open, and you have teams, you know, who then trickle in, but we still have those teams who aren't ready to go until the end of the day, and they need that full day, and they need help to get there. And so going through that process, you find out that it's maybe a little bit less of a crunch in the afternoon, but it means that you're busier throughout the day because you're working with teams more consistently. And so as inspectors, we aren't quite as bored first thing in the morning waiting for teams to come up. What was your experience, Al?
Well, I was going to answer Grace right away. She asked the question in the chat. Grace, we're working on robot inspection
real
rules
quick, Al,
right now
first,
for that.
The question, how do you think inspection will play out in the virtual competitions? Think there will be much of a difference trying to inspect remotely? And we're trying to read all those out just so we can make sure that they're on the recording.
Okay, so the response to that question is we're working on those robot rules right now. My directive at this point in time, along with Chuck Dickerson, my co-lead, is to edit the inspection checklist to go along with the virtual competitions. So everybody will get all of this information at kickoff in January. That's our intent. I can tell you that the robot rules have been edited, and they're currently at the translators in order to make sure that they're all available for us for kickoff, which is just a little bit over a month away. So that's what we can look at.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to jump in, John, on a couple of your earlier slides. You talked about some of the problems that teams have, and going along with Alex's question, we took a poll of all the people that were at events earlier this year with the no bag, and we found that the number of problems and the problems that were occurring at those events, and as you know, the first season was cut short where some of the events were in their practice day already. And we came to the conclusion that the number of problems that we were seeing at those events changed so small, that the changes were so small that there really wasn't any difference to events that were bagged. Teams generally stretched out their build season, and when it came to having to be at an event, suddenly they were facing the problems that they normally would have faced if they had put it in the bag. But as a funny story, John talked about team-induced chassis shorts. The first year that I was working with Wildstang was 1996, and I was a video mentor at that time because my business was in television. And the second year was the very first year of an event outside of Manchester. The Midwest Regional was the very first ever regional outside of Manchester. And I was at that event primarily as a spectator. I hadn't joined the pit crew yet. And my son came running out saying that they were having some kind of electrical problem that the Motorola engineers could not figure out, and they needed help. And they had been working on it for about an hour and a half at the time. And I walked into the pit and asked them what the problem was as I was looking over the robot. and they told me that they thought they had a noise problem because one of the drive motors kept on acting really, really strange. And I looked down into the robot and realized that they had used electrical conduit to build the robot base, because at that time, robot rules were different. And I looked down and there was a hole drilled through the conduit. And of course, as an electrical person, seeing holes drilled into a conduit is an automatic red flag for me. And I pointed to it and said, "What's that?" And the electrical mentor from Motorola had looked at it and said, "Mechanical kids." They had drilled through the wiring that ran from one side of the robot to the other. I had figured that out in about 2 minutes, and they never let me leave the pit after that. And then they put me in a position of responsibility to make sure that the robot would meet all of the inspection criteria from that point on. And that's how I got to where I'm at.
Do you have other questions?
There's a question in the chat from Grace. How
Yep,
do you think
Al already
inspection
talked
will...
about that.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed that.
So we talked about exploding tanks. You probably asked, do we still have exploding tanks? And the answer is yes. At the championship during division finals, one of the teams got forced under the loading zone 2 years ago. And they got forced with such force that the tank, one of the tanks in their robot was pushed up against the corner, welded corners underneath the loading zone, cracked the tank, and pieces of the tank shot up over the top of the player station. I would estimate they probably traveled about 30 feet.
Yeah, they part of the tank actually hit our human player station over on the other side of that match. That was what, 111, 2052, and 4607 against 5172, 1816, and 1732, I believe. And it sounded like a shotgun went off, and everybody in the stands heard it. It was impressive how impactful that was.
Yeah, I was standing about 10 feet away. It was pretty shocking.
Yeah, and I know we saw some, similar issues with that corner, because it's something that could just jut into your robot so far. So not only hitting tanks, but also hitting batteries. I know I've saw a couple posts of batteries that got slammed by that corner as well.
So I have another issue that I was sitting in on Andy Baker's presentation on drivetrains this morning, and he talked a little bit about bumpers and the 6-inch rule. And it's probably appropriate to talk about this. There's two reasons that we have bumper lengths in the robot rules. One of those is occasionally the game design committee wants to put a forced limit on teams in their design to allow the bumper opening to be just so wide for picking up objects off the floor. The other rule, the 6-inch rule as a minimum, we know from experience that any bumper segment that's less than 6 inches cannot possibly have enough grab to the robot frame to stay in place during matches. So that 6-inch rule surrounding each corner is to ensure that the bumpers do not fail. And the whole reasons the bumpers are there are to protect other robots from being damaged in robot-to-robot interaction. If you look back in history, bumpers were not always part of robots. And this came about because Woody and I were standing next to the field at the Midwest Regional in Chicago and watched a robot get bashed to the point where it could not be repaired. And we both agreed that something needed to be done. And Woody took it upon himself to go back to his home in Boston. And in his shop, he put together a prototype bumper in about 20 minutes. And he was on the game design committee along with Dave Lavery at the time. And he started talking to Dave, and Dave took the idea and ran with it and tested several different types of designs. with the intention of finding something that robot teams could effectively make fairly easily and would prevent any extreme damage to robots. And the 3/4 inch plywood and the 2.5 inch pool noodles covered by strong fabric was proved to be, in his testing, the best method of protecting robots. And what he did is he came up with these different designs, mounted them on robots on his practice field, ran the robot headlong across the field into the player station, and documented the damage to the robot frame in those tests. The 3/4 inch plywood and the 2.5 inch pool noodles produced the best protection for the robot during those tests. And that's why we were using it.
That was my team's rookie year. Bumpers were optional. I think it was our second year they became required for everyone. All right, well, if we don't have any more questions here, I think we're just about at the end of Jumpstart here. So we'll wish everyone a good weekend and a good season. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. And there is no wrap-up session. So once we close this out, that'll be it. And have a good rest of your day and weekend.
Stay safe, everybody.
I know that there's some questions about when we're going to get the everything posted to Jumpstart. But they're saying that the goal is to have the videos up by Monday. The presentations are uploaded if they've received them already.
All right. Stay safe, everybody. Have a good holiday season.
Yep. Let's all have fun at kickoff. Thanks, everyone.